They won't tell you this, but the world doesn't reward the kind, the fair, or the reasonable. It rewards the calculated. You've probably felt it before, that sense that someone less intelligent, less ethical, even less qualified is getting ahead. The loud one. The charming one. The cold one. You follow the rules, play fair, keep your intentions clean, and still, somehow, you're overlooked. Passed over. Ignored. You try to speak clearly, they interrupt. You try to reason, they dominate. You try to stay honest, they manipulate. And the worst part, they win. Not because they're better, but because they understand something you don't. Human behavior is not rational, it's programmable. Fear. Ego. Social pressure. These are the strings that move people. And while you're appealing to logic or fairness, they're pulling the strings. Niccolò Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. He knew that beneath every conversation, every decision, every so-called free will, there's a hidden current, fear of loss, hunger for validation, and a desperate need to belong. Influence doesn't come from truth, it comes from pressure, timing, and perception. It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both. Not because fear is cruel, but because it works. In this video, we're not talking about theory. We're going straight into the dark science of persuasion, the kind that doesn't live in textbooks, but in real conversations, real decisions, real power. You'll see how people manipulate without even speaking. How fear bypasses logic and takes control. How charm isn't just likable, it's strategic. And most importantly, how to recognize, resist, and, if necessary, use these tactics yourself. Because if you don't understand how the game is played, you will always be the one getting played. Machiavelli didn't need neuroscience to know what power looks like, he observed it in silence. The greatest influence is not what's said, but what's sensed. Not logic, not argument, presence. In any room, there are two kinds of people. Those who speak to be heard, and those who control without words. Power begins before the conversation does. And it's built with subtle, calculated weapons that most people never notice, but always feel. Let's break them down. First is mirroring, the illusion of likeness. People trust what feels familiar, not what's true. That's why the clever manipulator never forces connection, they reflect it. They mirror the posture, gestures, even breathing of the person in front of them, and trigger a primal instinct, this person is like me. It's not kindness, it's a strategic disguise. Machiavelli would call it camouflage. Not to bond, but to bypass the target's defenses. Because once the other person sees you as part of themselves, they'll drop their guard. And once the guard is down, the game begins. You don't need to convince them. They'll start convincing themselves. Second is eye contact, the unspoken command. There's a kind of stare that bends the conversation without raising a voice. It doesn't ask, it imposes. It doesn't beg, it claims. Sustained eye contact creates psychological pressure. It makes the other person question their own confidence, their own words, even their own identity. When you don't break the gaze, they begin to unravel. Machiavelli understood the effect of stillness. In a world of noise, silence becomes dominance, and in a room full of blinking, shifting glances, the one who holds the gaze is the one who owns the outcome. But it's not just about looking, it's about what they feel under your gaze. Are they being seen, or measured? Are you interested, or calculating? The difference changes everything. Third weapon is proxemics, the strategy of space. Distance is not neutral. It's tactical. Stand too far, you look submissive, uncertain, afraid to enter the battlefield. Stand too close, and suddenly, you're the intrusion, the pressure, the one who redefines the space. Machiavelli knew, power isn't just held, it's projected. How you take space, how you claim it, sends a message long before you speak. The confident move closer, but slowly. They don't ask permission, they create tension. And they let the other person feel the pressure of their presence, without needing to explain it. Because if someone has to ask for control, they've already lost it. These cues, mirroring, eye contact, proximity, aren't random. They're psychological levers, and Machiavellian minds use them like tools. To build trust. To disarm resistance. To assert dominance, quietly. Because in the real game of influence, words are just noise. Control happens before anyone speaks. You think you're in control, but you're not. You believe your decisions are logical, your reactions reasonable, your values intact. But most people don't act on logic, they act on feeling. And the people who understand that, the ones who truly influence others, aren't necessarily louder, smarter, or more experienced. They're just more precise. They know that influence begins not with words, but with emotion. Because once you control how someone feels, you can quietly shape what they do. And they'll believe it was their choice all along. It always starts with fear. Not panic, not even confrontation. Just a subtle injection of doubt. A quiet suggestion that something is at risk, your status, your security, your belonging. That's all it takes. The human mind, once uncertain, begins searching for safety, and that's when it becomes most vulnerable. In that state, people don't analyze. They obey. They follow the path that feels most stable, even if it leads directly into someone else's control. The genius of fear is that it doesn't need to be real, it just needs to feel close. And once it's in place, influence is effortless. Then comes guilt. Softer, but just as effective. Guilt doesn't demand anything, it simply changes how you see yourself. A carefully timed comment. A moment of silence. A shift in energy. Suddenly you're justifying, apologizing, correcting. Not because someone forced you to, but because they made you question whether you're still the person you claim to be. You punish yourself. You try to make it right. And in doing so, you give up ground you never meant to surrender. No confrontation. No negotiation. Just slow, quiet compliance. The most seductive, though, is validation. The feeling of being seen, understood, accepted, even briefly, creates a powerful psychological bond. One compliment. One gesture of approval. And suddenly, you're not just interacting, you're performing. You adjust your words, your tone, your posture, all in the hopes of keeping that approval close. And the moment it's withheld, even subtly, you feel it. That tension. That pull. You chase it. You adapt. Not out of fear. Not out of guilt. But because their recognition has become your reward system. And that's when influence takes hold completely, when your behavior changes voluntarily, just to preserve a feeling. These aren't manipulations in the dramatic sense. They're calculated emotional cues. And while many people use them unconsciously, the most effective minds use them deliberately. Niccolò Machiavelli understood that control doesn't require force, only awareness. He knew that fear sharpens attention, guilt softens resistance, and validation builds loyalty. Influence isn't about overpowering someone, it's about understanding what already drives them, and stepping into that space before anyone else does. Keep watching, because once you understand how emotion becomes strategy, you'll never see human behavior the same way again. Leave a comment which emotional lever has shaped your decisions the most, fear, guilt, or validation. And don't forget to like the video if this gave you something to think about. So if you want to recognize real power, stop listening to what people say. Watch how they make you feel. Because if someone can shape your emotions, they don't need to control your actions. You'll do that for them. And once emotion is involved, Once you're afraid to lose, eager to please, or desperate to feel seen, your ability to choose freely begins to erode. You don't notice it. It feels like you're still in control. But you're not. You've already been funneled. Your reactions have been softened, your defenses lowered, and now comes the final move, the illusion of choice. This is where the most effective form of manipulation occurs. Not in pressure. Not in threats. But in options. 2 doors. 2 paths. Both feel open. But behind the curtain, the outcome has already been engineered. You feel like you're deciding, that's the brilliance of it. But you're simply selecting from a set of pre-approved outcomes that lead to the same result, the one they wanted. This is the false choice. It's when the employer says, you can accept this offer now, or we'll need to open the role to other candidates. It's when the partner says, you can come with me or stay here, your call. It's when the leader says, either you're loyal or you're against us. On the surface, there's no pressure, you are given a choice. But underneath, one option clearly feels like loss, like danger, like exile. And the other, though imperfect, feels safer. More acceptable. The moment you step into that frame, the moment you start weighing which is better, you've already surrendered control. Because the real decision you needed, to question the frame itself, never happened. Machiavelli understood this perfectly. He knew people were less afraid of control than they were of confusion. That's why giving them structure, even fake structure, puts them at ease. They'll pick a side, follow an order, make a decision, as long as they feel like they're exercising will. The reality doesn't matter. What matters is that they're too emotionally entangled to stop and ask, why am I only choosing between these 2 things? Who decided these were the only options? This tactic doesn't rely on intellect. It relies on subtle urgency. One door is always made to feel slightly more aligned with your fears, or your values, or your pride. One door glows just enough to make you move. And because it feels voluntary, you don't resist, you rationalize. You'll defend the choice. Own it. Even promote it to others. Because to admit the truth, that you are guided, not choosing, is too heavy. So the illusion persists. And control deepens. The most dangerous thing about a false choice isn't the manipulation itself, it's how clean it feels. No pressure, no blame, no command. Just a decision. And you'll walk through the door they built for you with conviction, believing it was your idea all along. That's how power works when it's refined. Not with force. With framing. Not by taking freedom, but by shaping the field so well, you don't even notice it's gone. And the deeper truth is this, if you don't learn to recognize the false choices you're given, you'll spend your life picking between 2 cages, thinking one of them is freedom. And just when you think you've made your decision, just when you're sure you've taken the smarter path, avoided the trap, maintained control, there's one more tactic waiting. One you won't recognize as manipulation at all. Because it doesn't feel like pressure. It feels like understanding. And that's exactly why it works. What comes next is the most disarming form of influence, and the most dangerous, empathy. Or, rather, what looks like it. What feels like it. But isn't. Because real empathy is connection. Real empathy is presence without agenda. But when used as a weapon, empathy becomes something else entirely, not a bridge, but a hook. A way to step inside someone's mind not to understand them, but to steer them. And once someone believes you see them, they stop protecting themselves. This is how it happens. You open up. You express doubt, fear, shame, and they respond calmly, gently, with warmth. They share something of their own. Something carefully chosen, slightly vulnerable, just enough to make you feel safe. It's not a lie, that's the genius of it. It's just calibrated. Selected. Delivered with precision. And the moment you relax, the moment you believe this person gets me, they begin to guide the conversation. They don't push. They nudge. They ask how you feel, but only in ways that lead back to their point. They affirm your struggle, then shape your interpretation of it. And by the time you agree, it doesn't feel like surrender. It feels like relief. Because in that moment, they're not an opponent. They're an ally. An anchor. The one who finally understood you, and just happened to offer a direction when you were most open to suggestion. This is how influence hides inside intimacy. Machiavelli warned that men are more easily conquered by those who seem to care than by those who openly command. Because we drop our defenses for connection. We crave it. We seek mirrors, not threats. And so, the most effective form of control doesn't look like control, it looks like closeness. That's why weaponized empathy is so hard to resist. It doesn't challenge your walls, it waits for you to open them. And once inside, it doesn't take anything by force. It simply offers the right words, the right expressions, the right timing, and lets you lower the gate yourself. This isn't just manipulation, it's infiltration. Not through fear, not through dominance, but through emotional precision. You feel seen, heard, understood. And in that soft space, you begin to reshape your own stance. You adopt their language. You reinterpret your doubts. You align with their values, not because they convinced you, but because they guided your reflection. And because it felt real, because some part of it was, you never question the intent. You call it connection. Chemistry. Trust. But what it really was access. Not all empathy is dangerous. But when used by someone with a motive, when wrapped around a goal, it becomes the most undetectable form of influence. Because it doesn't force, it invites. It doesn't demand, it coaxes. And it always arrives with good intentions on the surface, but a hidden structure underneath. So ask yourself, when someone understands you, are they listening, or are they leading? Because once you've handed someone emotional permission, they no longer need your logical consent. Once you understand how persuasion works, once you see how easily emotion can override logic, how invisible frames shape decisions, and how even empathy can become a tool of control, a different kind of awareness sets in. One that's heavier, sharper, and far more uncomfortable than most people expect. Because now you're not just observing the game. Now you're holding the playbook. And that's where the real shift begins. Not in power, but in responsibility. You start to notice how often people around you are reacting without knowing why. You hear it in their language, feel it in their posture, read it in their choices. You recognize how easily trust is built with the right phrasing, how subtly fear can be planted, how smoothly control can be hidden behind care. And the more fluent you become, the more tempting it is to use it, not to help, but to get what you want. That's the silent danger of psychological skill. It doesn't make you better. It just makes you capable. What you do with that capability is a different matter entirely. Machiavelli believed that power, by its nature, isn't obligated to be kind, only effective. He saw manipulation not as evil, but as necessary. And in some arenas, that's still true. There are moments where sharpness is survival, where soft influence won't work, where the choice isn't between kindness and cruelty, but between control and collapse. But in everyday life, in relationships, communication, leadership, the same tools that can liberate can just as easily reduce someone to a pawn. And when you've seen behind the curtain, the cost of using these techniques without integrity is rarely visible at first. It shows up later, in broken trust, in quiet resentment, in the subtle erosion of authenticity. Not just in them, in you. That's why persuasion isn't just tactical, it's ethical. Real influence doesn't rely on deception, urgency, or fear. It reveals, clarifies, and offers direction without demanding obedience. You can create impact without control, loyalty without dependency, but only if you stay aware of when your intent shifts from connection to control. That line moves fast. The question isn't if you'll use these tools, it's how. Will your influence empower or create reliance? Will your words unlock or confine? There are no clean answers, but asking the questions puts you ahead already. By now, you've seen the blueprint. You've watched how fear bypasses thought, how guilt rewires identity, and how validation can become a leash. You've seen how silence speaks louder than words, how empathy, in the wrong hands, turns into a scalpel, and how offering a choice can be the cleanest way to remove freedom. These aren't theories. They're tactics, quiet, precise, invisible to the untrained eye, but devastatingly effective when used with intent. And once you see them, you can't unsee them. You begin to recognize the patterns in conversations that used to feel normal. You catch the shifts in tone that used to pass unnoticed. You feel the tension behind the kindness, the calculation behind the options, the control inside the comfort. It doesn't make you paranoid. It makes you aware. And with that awareness, a question takes root, quietly, persistently. Do I protect myself from this? Or do I use it? Because influence is neither good nor evil. It's architecture. It shapes behavior whether you believe in it or not. The only real difference is this: those who don't understand it get used by it. And those who do, decide. But power always comes with a mirror. The same tools that let you move others will, one day, be used on you. And the moment you believe you're above it, is the moment you're most exposed. That's why true strategy isn't just about execution. It's about discipline. Not in action, but in motive. Machiavelli gave us the skeleton. Modern psychology gave it flesh. But it's up to you to decide whether that body walks into the world as a weapon, or as a guide. Because this wasn't just a breakdown of tactics. This was a decoding of reality. And we've only scratched the surface. In the next videos, we'll go even deeper into the art of psychological defense, the power of unpredictability, the masks people wear to control outcomes, and the systems that govern not just your actions, but your very sense of self. You've seen how they influence you. Now it's time to learn how to rebuild yourself from the inside out, on your own terms. Stay sharp. Stay watching. And remember, the ones who win aren't always the loudest. They're the ones who understand exactly when to move, and when to remain unreadable.